finally here, guys. The Project Rebalance has hit old school, and with it, a huge amount of changes to combat, specifically magic and ranged, and honestly, it's a little overwhelming, so today we're going to cover just the changes to magic, because there's so much to talk about just within this one sector of the combat triangle. Now, the magic changes can be broken down into a few different categories. There are changes to weapons and armor, buffing or nerfing the strength of these weapons, but alongside that, there's a pretty big rework to the standard spellbook and how elemental spells work in old school. And finally, a pretty large list of old school RuneScape monsters have had elemental weaknesses added, so there's kind of three main factors we have to consider. So let's start off with the gear. For magic, really for the longest time, the most important stat has been magic damage. Now this is a percent, and would usually be reserved to high-end gear and the occult necklace. But that's all been rebalanced with the occult getting nerfed and a lot of that being spread out over a bunch of mid-level and endgame gear. So things like Infinity Robes, Bloodbark, the Malediction Ward, the Seer's Ring, low-level prayers, those now have magic damage associated with them, which means low and mid-levels now have access to more gear that gives magic damage. Now on paper that seems like you're going to get higher magic damage than before, but that's not really the case. The occult got nerfed from 10% down to 5%. Overall it's pretty similar. Now next up here we have the elemental spells on the standard spellbook. Now historically air spells were the weakest, water spells were the second weakest, earth spells were the second strongest, and fire spells were the strongest. Now that's fine, but it's pretty hard to balance them or make any significant changes when fire spells are just objectively better. Now they've actually changed how the base damage works, and all the elemental options will end up doing the same amount of damage once you've reached the appropriate magic level. So for example, once you've reached level 13 magic, all of your strike spells will have a base hit of 8. Once you hit 35 magic, all of your bolt spells will have the highest max hit of 12. Essentially though, once your magic level is high enough, all of your spells within a tier will hit the same. And finally here we have the actual elemental weaknesses themselves. Now there's a big spreadsheet that documents what all the weaknesses are, and they range from usually a 30% weakness up to a 100% weakness. Now for the most part these are reserved for lower level monsters, but there's a few bosses in here as well, albeit lower mid-level bosses. So there's really a lot to consider here now, and a lot has changed. So with that all said, let's try to kill some monsters. Okay, so one of the notable bosses that's actually on there is the Barrows brothers, and they have a 50% weakness to air spells. So let's try doing a Barrows run here. We've opted for a mid-level mage setup. We have Bloodbark, which now gives 1% magic damage for the top, bottom, and hat. We have the Occult still, a Tormented Bracelet, the Smoke Battle Staff, the Malediction Ward, Mage Arena 2 Cape, and the Seer's Ring even gives magic damage now. You can see our magic damage is 17.5%. So pretty decent, and we're also going to be taking advantage of a 50% elemental weakness. Now the spell we're going to be using is Wind Wave, and theoretically it's unlocked at level 62 magic, but realistically it doesn't hit its maximum damage until 75. Now 75 magic is kind of perfect because that's a very direct comparison to the Trident of the Seas or the Toxic Trident. So let's see the max hit of this thing. So we are going to be using prayers as well, because prayers do now have magic damage percent as well as increasing accuracy. Sure, it doesn't matter against Barrows too much, but the extra damage could make a difference. Alright, there's a 33, and against Carol as well. Seems pretty accurate even against the Ranger. Okay, so we just max hit a 35. Now that's actually a very similar max hit to what you get from the Toxic Trident, which takes, for one, a few more magic levels and is more expensive per hit. So I think certainly if you're doing Barrows, using Wind Wave is just probably going to be better. And if you opted to do Wind Surge for some reason, that would be even stronger, but I mean, I don't know how many people are doing Barrows at 95 magic. Okay, so most of the monsters' elemental weaknesses are usually between 0 and 50, but there's a few outliers, specifically things that have an elemental name, like Fire Giants, Water Fiends. Those actually have a 100% weakness. So we're going to try out a kind of AFK training setup. We're bringing pretty much the same thing I had before, except we're wearing Devout Boots and the Ring of the Gods imbued. And I'm going to see how much XP you can get per hour just auto-casting Water Wave. Now this would theoretically require 75 magic to get the highest max hit, and we'll find out what that is, I'm sure, shortly. Okay, there it is. 45 is our highest max hit with a level 75 spell and a smoke battle staff. That's actually crazy. Not to mention that you might do fire giants on the Slayer task, making it even better. Okay, so we AFK'd here for a while. We actually ended up getting nearly 100k per hour with Water Wave. Okay, just for fun, we're gonna try out Water Surge and a Tome of Water. Okay, so you can hit definitely at least 60 because I've hit 59 before and it wasn't my max hit. So with a Slayer task and game gear, you could probably hit nearly 70, I would guess, on fire giants. Who cares, right? But yeah, you could do it. Okay, I had one more idea related to fire giants or really any other monster with 100% weakness, and that is taking advantage of a very low level spell but using Chaos Gauntlets. For those that don't know, Chaos Gauntlets gives an extra 3 damage, straight up flat damage to your bolt spells. Historically, people would use that with Firebolt, but now we could do it with Water Bolt, and I'm kind of envisioning here a very low-level magic training method with a cheaper setup. So we're going to use Chaos Gauntlets, an Occult, and the Smoke Battle Staff again. This entire gear setup costs 3 mil, so it's not too expensive, and our cost per cast is only around 70, so it's pretty cheap. So let's give it a try. Okay, so keep in mind this is technically a level 23 spell, although you would probably more realistically say it's a level 35 spell. What can it hit? So it can hit a max hit of 33, which is kind of insane, and still offers about 60k per hour magic training while entirely AFK and being pretty damn cheap. Okay, another monster on the list that has a weakness to water is the Giant Mole. It only has a weakness of 50%, but we're going to try it out with the Tome of Water and pretty much the same gear setup. So the max hit is definitely good, but the accuracy is still pretty low. The Giant Mole does have a fairly decent magic defense bonus, and he runs away too, which makes it even more annoying. So I don't really think this is worth doing, but it's a better option than it was before, at least, I guess. Now another interesting one is Zulrah. Now they've added a 50% weakness to fire to all of Zulrah's phases, which means killing it now with the standard spellbook and a Tome of Fire should be better than it was before. Now, in the realm of magic, you're always competing with the Tumikin Shadow at higher levels, but for a mid-level account, one that's probably competing with the Trident, is this worth using? What kind of max hit are you looking at? Now, one thing to keep in mind is the Tome of Fire and the Tome of Water did get nerfed due to the elemental weaknesses being added. So the Tome of Fire no longer gives 50% damage, it's only 10%. Still probably worth using, but with the weaknesses getting added, they had to nerf it. Oh wait, what's that? 45, holy, okay. Okay, that was not a very good kill. Okay, we'll take it. It looks like the max hit in this gear is about 46, which is kind of perfect really, because Zulrah's damage is capped at 50 anyway. So we have acquired the Harmonized Orb, and I kind of wanted to try it out at a couple locations. It's kind of an interesting change because most of the elemental weaknesses are on monsters that are lower level, but the Harmonized Orb in theory stands to gain the most from the new elemental weaknesses. So there's only really a handful of locations you might consider using an endgame weapon. The main one being Zulrah, and maybe Rune Dragons, or other chromatic dragons, I suppose. Now against Zulrah, the max hit should still be roughly around 46, although the attack speed is one tick quicker, meaning it should compete at least with the Tumikin Shadow while being 3 times cheaper. The nice thing though about the weaknesses is it does increase your accuracy alongside the damage. So for example, for Zulrah has a 50% fire weakness, which means we'll get 50% bonus accuracy and damage. The way the damage works is you take all of your magic damage gear, add that together, and then add the elemental weakness together as well, and then multiply that by your base damage. So we have about 48% magic damage bonus, plus a 50% elemental weakness is nearly doubling the base damage. Fire Surge is a base damage of 24, so we're looking at about 47 as a max hit. Now I did try it at both Zulrah and Rune Dragons, and particularly Zulrah, it is quite strong there. Now is Zulrah a big enough draw to pick up the Harmonized Orb? Maybe not. There's definitely one place that's improved pretty dramatically. So overall my thoughts are the new elemental weaknesses are pretty cool, mostly impactful for early game accounts where a 100% weakness starts to really change your training methods and your damage. Doesn't really seem to make too big a difference late game, particularly because They didn't add weaknesses into almost any endgame monsters. What are you guys' thoughts? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.